How's it going, guys? Anfield here, and welcome to the final of the Wargaming Fest discussion videos. This video is just going to touch up on most of the important stuff that I haven't already discussed, which is primarily related to the Sandbox. So let's get right into it. So under Sandbox Server's second iteration, Wargaming say, global rebalancing is hard to implement and get right, but we're committed to moving forward on this front. This past summer, players and developers tested a few different balance setups on the special Sandbox server. We can't thank you enough for answering the call and helping us with feedback and suggestions. The second Sandbox server kicks off in 2017. Unlike the first, which featured massive changes to vehicle roles and more, Stage 2 will be divided into two phases, each introducing selective changes for you to test. This time we'll continue fine-tuning features that showed good results during the summer testing. Now, one of the most important things I picked up on when reading this was that the second Sandbox server kicks off in 2017, and unlike the first, which featured massive changes to vehicle roles and more, Stage 2 will be divided into two phases, each introducing selective changes for you to test. Now, this is super important because one of my most critical criticisms of the Sandbox was the huge, wide-sweeping changes they made. They changed so much, and what was difficult was you were playing a completely different game at times because so many changes were introduced, and these were radical changes. And you couldn't really test how these changes were because they were testing against things that didn't even exist in the game. Too much was changed, and not enough was changed a little bit, tuned a little bit differently. You know, the changes were far too radical and too many at the time. So I really like that this time they're going to be, you know, slowly introducing selective changes for us to test so that it's a little bit better and we can actually see how things properly perform without like huge, overwhelming amounts of changes. So hopefully this will go a lot better. So in regards to Phase 1 agenda, Wargaming say it'll include changes to accuracy, penetration loss over distance, and the revised overmatch ricochet rule that was first revealed during the 9.17 public test. They go on to explain that currently the penetration stats and great accuracy of top tier tank destroyers and medium tanks allow them to hit and penetrate well-armored frontal projection even at long range, so they'll be tweaking their penetration stats and penetration loss over distance mechanic, as well as accuracy stats for all other tanks, to raise the role of armor and make it more fun to play heavily armored vehicles. So this has a lot of implications, but first I'll just quickly go over the revised overmatch ricochet rule, which they don't actually bring up in the more detailed section here, but they say that, you know, this is brought up in the 9.17 test server, and they say the revised overmatch ricochet rule. I don't know if that means this is actually, you know, the one that we brought up. That's, you know, that's what they're counting as revised. What we saw in 9.17 is the revised, or when they say revised, do they mean the revised version of the new one we got in 9.17? So that's why they withdrew it, so they could revise it. I'm not sure exactly what they mean, whether we'll get exactly what was introduced or we'll get something else. But at the end of the day, it's very clear that the overmatch changes will probably increase the armor of quite a few tanks. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what overmatch changes we do get. So let's discuss the role of armor, and bear with me because this may be long-winded. This is a very complex topic. Now, obviously at the moment we have tanks that have good armor and it works. And you also have tanks that are supposed to have good armor and it doesn't work. Now, good examples of this is the Mouse versus the Type 5 Heavy. The Mouse, the armor works when it's angled surprisingly well, and a lot of people don't give the Mouse enough credit. It's incredibly good at bouncing when it is angled correctly. Now, part of the issue the Mouse has is just too slow to angle against dynamically changing targets that move around a lot. Obviously, you have to change your angle once your target changes its angle. But it does work. Now, the Type 5, on the other hand, has flat surfaces at different angles. So when you do angle the tank, it opens up a new flat side that is juicy for someone to pen. So that's part of the issue. You have tanks like the E5 that prove the armor still works as well. The other thing that's important to remember about armor is it doesn't have to always bounce things to be effective. As long as it makes your opponent aim longer, you are having a benefit because it reduces the DPM of the opponent. And that's really important to remember. Now, discussion of armor could go on all day long. There are so many complex issues involving it, as well as the fact that you change certain things. It's very difficult to see the exact ramifications without extensive testing. So hopefully the Sandbox will show either one way or the other what are the best ways to help heavy tanks in the current meta without making them far too strong and basically unbeatable. The first iteration of the Sandbox did kind of show basically that when you start to really tweak penetration and other things like that, heavy tanks become incredibly powerful. And so that is something obviously we'll have to be very cautious with the Sandbox. We'll just have to see exactly what Wargaming does and what exactly they do end up touching to see whether or not heavy tanks will become far too powerful. Now, it's important to remember that it's not just heavy tanks. They talk about the role of armor, and there are armored tanks that aren't heavy tanks. This does include quite a lot of tank destroyers that have armor, as well as a few medium tanks that have at least competent levels of armor. So it's important to remember that as well when we look at this. It's not just heavy tanks, but also other tanks like that will be receiving a buff. So when you think of tanks that have maybe good armor, but it's not quite like really strong, just think they will be receiving a buff as well when you look at nerfing penetration and penetration loss over distance as well. So even tanks like the E50M may be receiving basically a buff purely because of these changes. The armor doesn't really work very well for the most part, especially against tier 10 guns, but who knows, with these changes, maybe the E50M armor will suddenly become quite viable. You also have to remember, obviously, the Russian turrets will become stronger, especially with the overmatch changes, and there are other situations like that. So there are a lot of ramifications for changing anything. Balance is very difficult, and I understand that it could be quite difficult from Wargaming's perspective to alter it because of all the things that also then get affected. As we saw with the overmatch changes, there are a lot of unexpected buffs to tanks that probably weren't thought out through ahead of time by Wargaming, and that's why they decided to scrap it for now. I do worry about wide sweeping changes like this, especially when you look at the penetration loss over distance and accuracy loss over distance. This does concern me purely because you don't know how much this may affect the game in terms of tanks that may become far too powerful, and this does concern me when you make these kind of broad changes. What I think I would prefer to see instead is changes to the premium ammunition, which doesn't seem to be talked about at all. This is something that concerns me more because I know a lot of people complain about gold rounds all the time. Oh my god, gold rounds are the worst thing. I'm not a Unicum because I don't fire gold rounds because I have moral standards or whatever, etc. Right? But there is, a case to be made that why not change them? I don't understand it. I do like the idea that you have, let's say you have AP and then APCR, and the AP is low pen but good damage. The APCR is high pen but not so good damage. So why not make changes like these so that heavy tanks that have armor get the value of the fact that people shoot you for less damage because they're having to use higher pen rounds, whereas medium tanks and other tanks get punished for having no armor because people will use their higher damage rounds. This seems to me like an easier change, and a change that is probably less dangerous to do than penetration loss over distance. I understand it because obviously you have maps where they're wide open, heavy tanks are slow, easy moving targets. Although I would argue that really on those maps, it's not so much the mediums and the tank destroyers that are the biggest issue, although obviously that's part of it. It's more the artillery. And artillery is being changed. They're being fixed, quote unquote. Certainly, I would argue that the changes to artillery are probably not going to make them any worse. I don't really think that's possible. So, I think that's more the issue there. So, yeah, personally, from my point of view, I would prefer them to alter the premium ammunition system. On the other hand, I would also say the armor isn't entirely not working either. You have tanks like the E5 that proven the armor isn't dead. It's not like you can give a tank a lot of armor and it still be terrible because of premium ammunition. That tank works well. So, it's more the case that too many tanks that are supposed to be armored aren't really quite armored well enough in certain situations. And some other tanks that do have armor it doesn't work because it can't be angled, such as the Type 5 Heavy. The mouse works because you can angle that tank. The Type 5 doesn't work because you angle it and you create a new flat part of the armor. So yeah, that does concern me quite a bit, that they're changing some of these particular penetration features. But as you can see, I mean, there's lots to talk about. It's a huge change, and there's so many potential ramifications to the game that you could talk all day, and I don't want to do that in this pure video, but perhaps maybe I'll make like a podcast for that sort of thing that can last an hour or whatever, and I can ramble on to my heart's content in that regards. But for this video, obviously want to try and condense it a little bit. So the final thing I guess I would talk about in terms of that is map design, because if you're going to have tanks that have much better armor than they used to, and the armor is far more effective, it's going to be very difficult when you get into these corridor meta maps if you're anything other than a heavy tank or a medium or tank destroyer with high levels of armor. So that is something that is potentially a concern from my point of view. Although, maybe it'll slow down the game. We have these 3-minute battles at the moment. I suppose if tanks are very difficult to destroy, that will slow the game down, certainly. Or maybe artillery will finally have a role, who knows. Yeah, so that's pretty much it with armor that I want to go over for now, because I don't want to go on forever. Although I certainly could do that. So let's move on to the Phase 2 agenda stuff. So for the Phase 2 agenda, Wargaming say there's going to be changes to artillery and the new consumables that could be used several times per battle. Now, obviously, the changes to artillery are the big thing here. But I don't want to completely gloss over the new consumables that could be used several times per battle. I think that's really cool. And I actually wrote down a lot of notes and questions that I had that I wanted to discuss with you guys. But this is already over 10 minutes long and kind of turning into a podcast, so I don't want to go on for too much longer, but obviously this is important stuff, so I do want to discuss it. But let's go into the artillery first. Now, what Wargaming say is, for artillery, we'll continue testing the stun shell shock feature. We improved it a lot since the first Sandbox, which is good. So it's different from what some of you saw in the summer. Also on the docket in this phase are aiming improvements, including the introduction of an alternate aim similar to Battle Assistant. Damn it. We knew that was coming though. The UI will undergo a few improvements as well, and will provide you with important information about the stun, the duration, and the radius, etc. related to the stun. So yeah, that's basically what they say in regards to that. I mean, the Battle Assistant, I guess, might not be so bad once you remove the current artillery mechanics and damage and all that stuff. I mean, to be honest, that's a mod that should never been allowed, and let alone sponsored by Wargaming, but there you go. Battle Assistant it is. But the stun shell shock stuff is kind of interesting, and it's a unique take on what can be done about artillery. Now, look, obviously most of us would say remove it, but they're not going to do that. That's way too bold, I think, for Wargaming, and I don't think they ever want to admit that it's just so bad that it needs to be removed completely from the game, which would be lovely, but it's not going to happen. So this is what we have, and I think it is probably better than the current system in place. So there's that at least, and they do say it's going to be different from what we saw in the summer, which was also quite frustrating. It wasn't quite so, oh, I got one shot, that is really retarded, but it is still quite a frustrating mechanic to be stunned and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what they have changed there. Now, they also say in this phase we're changing, we're making aiming improvements, is how they say it. And they say including the introduction of the alternative aim similar to Battle Assistant. So I don't know if that purely just means Battle Assistant, but they say including Battle Assistant. So it sounds like there are other aiming improvements. Now, in the previous Phase 1 agenda stuff, they said they're nerfing tanks, or accuracy on certain tanks. So I don't know what they mean by aiming improvements, whether that's entirely related to artillery. I don't know. It would be ironic, of course, to nerf the accuracy of normal tanks and then improve it of artillery, but there you have it. The UI will undergo a few improvements as well, so that's just information about the stun, which obviously you will need. So that's good. The more information they give us in terms of how to avoid it and how it works, the better it'll be, I suppose. It's always better to understand something than to not understand something and then start raging about how is this happening. but maybe we all need to hashtag tank better. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, so that's interesting stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, there's not much to talk about because we already saw the artillery changes in the first sandbox, and they just said that they're going to improve and basically change a few of the things, and we won't know anything about that until they're introduced, and there's no point really discussing what they should do differently to artillery, I suppose, because that's not happening. So we'll just see how it works out, basically, and hope for the best, really, at the end of the day, which is all we can do until we actually see what changes come in the sandbox. Which, I mean, I assume the sandbox will be coming in the summer, but maybe it'll come earlier than that with any luck. So we'll have to see exactly what they do there. So quickly onto the new consumables that you'll be able to use several times per battle. I obviously have quite a lot of notes on this, but I don't want to go too in depth because obviously the video is already quite long. But some of the questions I wanted to know was, what kind of cooldowns are we looking at? Because I don't want to be too fast, because if it's too fast, then it won't punish people that continually make mistakes and can get out of tracks, as well as like tank destroyers being able to repair their tracks multiple times. So I assume there's got to be a decent cooldown, whether it's a minute, 2 minutes, I don't know. It really depends on how long the battles are lasting, I suppose. But yeah, that's an interesting thing that I kind of was trying to think about what exactly will be balanced in this regards to a cooldown, so let me know what you guys think. Another thing I thought about, which is far too complex probably and will never be added, but it would be kind of cool to see that there'd be a minimum contribution to the battle before you actually have access to multiple consumables. So, I was thinking of those times where you're like carrying a game and you're working really hard and you get ammo racked because of a YOLO light tank snapping you, or an artillery hit that ammo racks you, and like there's your ability to carry. It would be kind of cool if those are the people that are rewarded with the ability to do that. But like if you're facing an enemy that's been camping in the back of the base the entire battle and not really done anything, but they're like really healthy, and you track them and get around them, but then they're able to use their new repair kit or whatever, it would be kind of cool to see like a minimum damage amount before you're actually able to use these. For light tanks, it would be more difficult in that regard, I suppose, unless it's purely a medium heavy tank or a tank destroyer thing. I don't know, but obviously you won't want to block light tanks having the ability to use these purely because they're not doing any damage, but just an idea I was thinking of anyway. My other question was, are they going to be the same price, cheaper, or more expensive? So if you're using multiple consumables, does it become more expensive each time? That kind of thing. That could also tie into the contribution. Maybe they're cheaper if you're doing a lot in the battle. Yeah, it's just stuff like that I was thinking of, because obviously we're not going to get these answers until we we see the sandbox. But it's fun to think about, I guess, But yeah, the other thing I was kind of thinking of was, when you think about consumable loss, you think of like a lot of tanks that get ammo racked too easily or lose crew members. This could be a big buff to some of these tanks. You think of like the Centurion that gets ammo racked all the time, Leopard that gets ammo racked a lot. The ability to repair that multiple times, that's quite a big buff in certain cases. So I'm actually quite pleased with some of these tanks. I don't really think that any tank will become too strong now because it's no longer that vulnerable. I don't know, but yeah, the final thing I want to talk about when it comes to consumables is, are these things are they all going to be similar in the sense that you can use them over and over again like repair kits, or they're going to do it differently? Because I would kind of like to see new consumables, not just the same ones we have, or you just have repair kits and then you can use them over and over again. So I was thinking of having different types, one where you can reuse them, and one that they become active and then you can use them one time, like new consumables that, let's say you have an HP recovery kit, so that recovers 10% of your hit points, but you can only ever use it once, you can't reuse it. And then a different type, which is a crew stimulant that you can use, different from rations, which are active all the time, that lasts for 30 seconds, but gives your crew a 15% buff or something cool like that. If they're going to change consumables and make them reusable, I think it's about time that they add more stuff to them, more consumables, make it more interesting. And the same goes for equipment, really, but if we're going to do consumables, let's add new ones, more interesting ones. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Am I just being over excitable or whatever? Let me know what you think anyway. So yeah, it's certainly interesting. It'll be cool to see exactly how they're implemented. So I was about to wrap up this already very long video up, and then I sort of remembered that there was the HD maps, and they're not really worth their own video. So I'm just gonna slap them on the end here, and all this information comes from the dailybounce.net, so if you want to check them out up, or hopefully remember to leave a link in the description. But basically this is all changes to like lighting and explosions and water and other things like that, and very interestingly an actual maybe not Havoc itself, but an engine that allows destructible objects finally. And now those of you that will remember, quite a few years ago we were supposed to get the Havoc engine, which meant that buildings that previously were not destructible would be destructible, and there'd be lots of little parts coming apart, and it would look really cool and awesome. And we never got that because I guess the servers just couldn't handle it, and I guess it maybe can't be done client side. I don't know, but it looks like they want to add this, and I really hope they do because it's really, really cool, and will also modernize the game a lot. Now, I'll be posting screenshots, hopefully you'll be seeing them now, about what they had. You know, this is clearly Abby, and it looks really cool. This is just, I guess the Daily Bounce guy, I don't know if his screenshots are, you know, a source of his screenshots, but, you know, this is from a TV, I guess, that they're displaying at Wargaming Fest, and it looks really, really cool. So, yeah, I hope they change it, because I have to admit, it does look really, really sweet, and I think it'll be really cool. And the Havoc engine, well, obviously whatever engine, I guess they're still using the Big World, but like it's a super changed version of the Big World. I guess it'll be part of that. It's not going to be Havoc itself, but something similar. So hopefully it's implemented and the servers are okay with this, because it would be really cool. So I just wanted to slap this at the end here. And again, a shout out to the Daily Bounce for the pictures. And yeah, that would be really cool if that's added into the game. So yeah, that about wraps that up. Thank you so much for watching, and if you've stuck with me to the very end, wow, you're also, give yourself your pat on the back. I mean, it's been a little bit of a ramble, but it's really cool stuff. I mean, I'm really passionate about this stuff, so I can talk for days, and there'll be plenty of stuff I didn't really get to touch on, and yeah, so it's certainly worthy of a podcast, I think, in this sense. And maybe I'll do that if enough people are interested, and I'll include some World of Tanks personalities that I get to talk to, so it's not just me rambling to myself the entire time. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed, and let me know about the abundance of things, what your thoughts on these are, because the past two videos, it's actually been really interesting reading your comments and seeing exactly what people have to say on this stuff. It's important changes, and then hopefully we get to see quite a few of them in a good form, so to speak. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll catch you on the next video.